and welcome to another episode of Walking in the Woods. And we're going to look at plants and we're going to look at views. And we are in Preston, Connecticut. And right now we are walking in an open hickory birch forest. And there's lowlands on this side. And last time I was here was in the fall of 22. And the fall colors were pretty nice. But that day I had a massive headache, so today I am more clear in the mind. So we're going to look at some plants, starting with Betula lenta, or the black birch. We have Prentice Hill, or the American hornbeam. Let's see. What else we got here? We got Vicinium. This is a high bush blueberry in the genus Vicinium. Very common. Oh, look at that. It's a Corylus, probably Americana, or the American hazelnut, or the beaked hazelnut. Let me check. This Corylus cornetta, how you can tell it apart from the other one is that this will be more fuzzy. Its stem is more fuzzy. So cornetta is not fuzzy. That's how you tell them apart. And when they're fruiting, you know, their seed pods are much different. We got Smilax rotundifolia, a very common prickly vining bastard in the lily family. It's a nice native plant, but not nice to hike through. And it can form dense thickets, especially where it meets with Clethra alnifolia, and then you never want to hike through those types of areas. The Clethra alnifolia, these are white in the late summer, like August. They smell amazing, and they are probably the most common wetland shrub. And they can form dense thickets, and sometimes they can be diverse. Like this area is pretty diverse because there's standing water, but in areas where there is not standing water, it can just kind of just be a thicket of this with not much else, or what else is just kind of scattered here and there. Whereas this can have like this is a floodplain, or just a swampy wetland, a seep, and these can be highly diverse. So here is an invasive plant in the rose family. This is multiflora rose, and this was actually brought in the early 1900s as a living fence plant because it's spiky and it grows really fast and it spreads really fast, and it was planted as an erosion control along highways and streets and as a living fence plant for pastures. And thus it became very invasive. In some areas it's thicker than others, especially degraded swamps where it just forms this prickly understory of not very fun. White flowers in June, they do smell nice, but other than providing some forage for bumblebees and some berries for birds, it doesn't really do much for any it's not a host plant to any caterpillars, which is a huge problem because you need the caterpillars to feed the birds, and because those caterpillars are the base of the ecosystem. So what this plant does, it'll form a dense, prickly thicket. The deer tend to not eat it as much, and it eventually just becomes one of the only things left. And right next to it, we got stupid Selectris orbicalis, or the bittersweet, another horrible invasive. The path here, we have GM canadens, or just white avens they call it. It is a herbaceous perennial. Has this beautiful little winter basil rosette, and it has little strawberry-like flowers that are white in the summer. And they're a good native plant. They spread pretty fast and they're quite common. The majority of New England used to be pastureland, and pastureland for sheep and cattle. So a lot of our forests are still recovering from that. And so what we're left is kind of like a building understory, a aging overstory. So as the soil layer reestablishes with all the mycorrhiza and the fungus and organic layer, because when this was a pasture, a lot of that was eroded away and exhausted out because the act of grazing is pretty extractive. So they take a lot out of the soil. It all erodes down, gets into the creeks, and you're left with some pretty crap stuff. So as the forest ages, the soil gets better, and over time we'll end up with a really nice understory. But for now, our understories are primarily open, low herbaceous content, so there isn't much in the summer up here. It looks pretty similar, just some patches of green with your shrubs. It's an oak heathland. Here's your black huckleberry here. And I'm sure there's low bush blueberry here and there as well. You got a bayberry. This is a Mirica. This is a pretty common dry land species. So with time, as the soil layer gets thicker, the trees get bigger. An herbaceous layer will develop, and this will slowly turn into a more mesic forest. Right now it's dry. You can see its history of being pasture because it has these juniperous virginianas, the red cedars. And the reason why there's red cedars in here is because this used to be wide open. These red cedars only germinate in open conditions, so over time these will eventually die. That's why most of their limbs are dead at the bottom, getting shaded out by the oak trees. And this will become an open oak forest, and will likely get filled with ferns and whatnot. Probably hay-scented fern, the densitatia. Those are probably the most common fern in the area, especially in the uplands. So as this forest transitions into more of a kind of open hardwood, it kind of reaches like a point where diversity in plant species is low. So when it's an open pasture, like developing with these cedars, you'll get a lot of wonderful herbaceous plants. So while it may not be peak ecosystem, and it's a grassland, you know, it used to be a grassland. So as it was developing, it was probably filled with all sorts of goldenrods and little blue stem grasses and just tons of wildflowers. Great for, it was a good plant diversity area. So as the forest ages, all that stuff gets shaded out, and there isn't much that can grow in these deep shade conditions that are able to compete with these oaks until they get large enough to where, you know, the forest layer develops and diversity kind of goes back up. Like with time, as this forest ages, likely what will happen is these little dendrolycopodiums, this patch will spread, and we'll just have dense patches of dendros in here and big blueberry shrubs, and it'll be very beautiful. But probably in another 100 years or so, this forest is likely already 100 years in the making. So it's pretty much an infant, because when they pasteurized it, they pretty much set the forest back to square one, because they destroyed the herbaceous layer, they destroyed the mycorrhiza, they basically destroyed the soil. And so now the soil is redeveloping. And it's about 100 years in the making. In this oak heathland, you got your black huckleberries. These are all high bush blueberry shrubs. And they're not too exciting to explore in the summer, but it's still neat to see and explore and mark where these kind of habitats are. It's quite the common habitat in old pasture land. It's basically an emergent forest. You say it's an emergent oak heath forest. And it's very rich in Lepidoptera. Lepidoptera? Yeah, that's basically butterflies and moths. So it feeds a lot of birds, at least in the spring, but they're more forest birds, and there isn't much pollinator life except for in the spring when the blueberries and huckleberries are blooming. And then other than that, like the next thing that blooms after that is the Chimaphila maculata, which are here and there. It's another heath, but really there isn't much late summer blooms in this area. Those are typically more out in your pastures and meadows, which is what this used to be. Lichen that blew off from a tree in the genus Usnea, or a bushy beard lichen. These are really common, and they typically occur in the treetops. You typically find them more in uplands, because that is where the humid winds of summer, winter, and fall blow, and they rustle through the treetops. You don't really find them too much in the lower understory because it's a little bit too shady. And you really only find them on south-facing, or, yeah, pretty much south-facing slopes where a lot of that kind of moist ocean air blows through. Here we got another plant in the rose family, or Rosaceae. It's Potentilla canadensis, or the yellow cinquefoil. Potentilla is pretty common. It's one of the more common wildflowers. It has these little tiny yellow flowers in May and June, and it's a good pollinator plant. It's a ground cover, and they're everywhere. And they like it against like stumps. They basically like it wherever there isn't thick leaf layers, because that shades them out. Pretty nice. It sends out little stolons. That's what these are. So they come up and then they'll dip down and reroot. Got Calcladium imponens, or the brocade moss, one of the more common mosses here, and they typically grow on rock, so underneath this is a rock. It's cool stuff, one of my favorites. Here we have Porpidia albocerulescens, or the smoky boulder lichen, or smoky-eyed boulder lichen. And those little smoky eyes is where it pretty much sends out its little spores, and that's how it procreates. It's one of the more pretty lichens. I mean, all lichens are freaking beautiful. And this one is growing on a small rock in this shady Oakland. It's very beautiful. This one's one of the nicer ones I've seen. Very nice. Main reasons why I botanize in areas like this is because parts of this property are owned by a development group. And that development group, I wouldn't be surprised, in the next 20 years, sells off these properties for profit and makes some stupid houses that are probably not really meant for lower income people. They're for, you know, the richer folks around here. Nothing against richer folks. They really worked hard for it. Well, they didn't. But regardless, so a lot of this land will likely just end up being lawn and giant McMansions, which is how a lot of this region is. Lawns and giant mansions. It's great that they're building houses, but it's sad to see a lot of our forest land go. And you know, when they do sell these places, they sell the houses for like $700,000, $800,000, and you know, probably a fourth of that goes to the people who actually build the houses and make the houses and sell the houses, and most of it just goes into the pockets of the realty group, which is just kind of sad and disappointing, because none of that money will be invested towards maintaining the woodlands or the properties, you know. A lot of the properties, a lot of private land is just a commodity. It doesn't matter what's on it. All that matters is that it's land. You know, you can always clear out the forest. But, you know, the forest that remains, who gives a shit? You know, who gives a shit if it's filled with invasives? It's just not really the... It's not really the vibe these days, you know? They're like, oh, it's land, it's woods. It's really not society's main concern of what happens in the forest or to the forest. You know, this is just kind of a background piece. Even though millions of people live in this region, the forests are mostly empty of people. Because it's mostly all private land, but also nobody goes outside, nobody gives a shit. So it's sad to see. You know, I explore these places, and I've been seeing development really ramp up. And here in New England, I feel like we're going to be like one of those richer enclaves of America that just slowly gets filled with rich developments. Just look at the Gold Coast. I mean, I have this project where I'm pretty much mapping forest tracts and development and fragmentation of forest. And along the Gold Coast, over by New York, pretty much every fucking acre of land is filled with a house. And they're big old fucking McMansion houses, and filled with invasive plants and lawn. And, you know, in like a 500-acre area of suburbs, you might have like 20 acres of forest. Like open forest where you can hike, or it's just open forest. So it's gonna be how a lot of New England's gonna end up, which is kind of disappointing, especially southern New England. So I'm recording what grows here for history. I'm taking pictures. I'm videoing these areas for history. You know, see, when people in the future will come back, they're like, wow, this is what we lost. Even though they're not the most beautiful or, you know, intact forest in North America, there's still areas that deserve to be protected. And I mean, we've already taken enough already. I mean, this area's already been fucked into Tacoma once. It doesn't need to be forever houses for some rich folks that fucking sell health insurance or some shit like that. But that's just my 2 cents. I know nobody really gives a crap about invasive plants. I mean, that's just kind of how it kind of looks these days. But, you know, I'll keep doing what I'm doing. I run a native plant, like gardening and landscaping business, and, you know, hopefully with time and effort, I can try to change the overall mentality of people around here. Even one person, you know, it's a cascading effect. So I'm hopeful for change. But I know we're going to lose a lot before we ever see significant amounts of change. So that is why I record. Some spoon-leaved moth, or Briar Andersonia lissamara. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. And then here's some tree moss, or Climacium, in this little lowland here. This little CPC persimmon with the spice bush. It's a spice bush wetland. Another variant of common wetland throughout southern New England. In this area, instead of being filled with clethra, like the clethra variant of seeps, this one has spice bush. And I feel like these areas are more rich, whereas the clethra ones are more acidic. Alright, so this has a higher pH. I'm going that way. I hear a stream. Pacra aurea. It's an Asteraceae, and it looks like a little dandelion, and it blooms in May. And it's on a stalk. And it's relatively common, but in this area, it's like you find it maybe a quarter of the time. It really depends. You find it where you find spice bush, but it's not as common as like some mosses are more common than that. Look how beautiful that Briar Andersonia is. So bright green, so nice. The spoon-leaved moss, very nice. And look, I got some dicranum. We got Rubus phenoculaceus, or the wineberry. This is an invasive rubus, or kind of raspberry type of thing, and it can take over. I've yet to see it take over. The berries are quite delicious. And then you got, your ever-present, ever-invasive Berberis thunbergii with its vomit-tasting berries. Here we are in a young birch hickory forest. You have carpinus, the hornbeam, you have young shagbark hickories. This area is probably around 50 to 70 years old. It's young. There's your shagbark here. And when you have shagbarks, you have more of a rich area. So the species diversity tends to be higher, especially as the forest ages. And that's mostly due to the forest just having a higher pH. In forests with lower pH, they tend to have lower diversity because it's kind of like an extreme habitat for plants. I like shagbarks, though. They're relatively uncommon in most places I hike. So it's cool to see, a decent population. And I love their bark. Look at that. All shaggy. Good fire starter. Oh look, it's maidenhair spleenwort. Typically I find these more in uplands or in crags of rocks. Look at that. Relatively uncommon. Probably found in like 1 in 5 forest that you go hiking in. And you typically find it more in rich forest. I think this is a robin's plantain. But I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But there's the sorry on it. Pretty damn cool. So this is Cardamine pennsylvanica, a pretty common mustard family plant that grows in swamps, in wetlands, and along creeks. It has a tiny little white flower stalk. It's a cress, so the flowers and leaves and fruit can be used kind of like as a spice. And it's also edible. It's a winter green. They taste okay. They're kind of spicy. Little cardamine. So this is a plant in the genus Rumex, or a dock. It's a common weed, and it feeds a couple interesting butterflies. I don't know the exact species, but I've seen it before, and this one's definitely, distinct compared to other docks. iNaturalist knows this species, and this will be on my iNaturalist later. Here in this silty little creek, we have Symplocarpus foetitis, or the skunk cabbage, and it's in the Araceae, or the arum family. Relatively diverse family here in New England. There's about 20 species, and I've found a lot of them. They're pretty cool, and they stink, and they're awesome, and they're very common. The most common plant in the Araceae here in southern New England. We have Ranunculus recurvatus, or recurvatus, or the hooked buttercup. It's a common buttercup, the Ranunculaceae, and it has these tiny little yellow flowers. Not too distinct, But they're quite common, especially in richer areas. And I love them. Nice little buttercup. Favorite parts of hiking is finding weird shit in the forest. Here we got ammo box within this little rock fort. I don't know. Pile of rocks. Little ammo box. Let's see what we got here. Alright, it says MAGA? MGGA? I don't know. Let's see if it's openable. Yep, here we are. A little container. Alright, I'll put it back. Alright, hold on. We're opened up and it's like a little thing, you know? It has dates and all sorts of trinkets and knickknacks, bouncy balls and erasers in America. How cool is that? I'm gonna leave my name and number in here. This is some sort of like cash series. This was made in like 2020, and people, I guess there's a whole series of people that do caches and whatnot. See, this was at November 3rd, 2020, and my most recent one is today, 12/31. All sorts of, you know, it's cool to find this sort of stuff. Canoe hiker, I mean, Evergreen Adventures, 2 trails. I guess these are all different people. Geonut and Conscious Slab, I don't know. Awesome Cache Series, Scout 338. I don't even know any of these people. This must be some TikTok or something like that. Bobo Climber. Very interesting. It's neat to find stuff like this. You got all sorts of fun goodies and knickknacks in there as well. Here we have some ash, or Fraxinus, being invaded by the emerald ash borer. That's what this circular borehole is. And this is torn off by a woodpecker to get the grub inside. And how you know it's the emerald ash borer is because it has a circular hole. It's an ash, and it's dying. And to me, that's like, you know if an ash is dying around here, it's probably from the emerald ash borer. The emerald ash borer is a non-native invasive insect brought in on horticultural landscaping stock trees. So, yeah. What you call a black muck swamp. It is a swamp with black muck. Herbaceously rich. You can find lots of different species of orchids in here. And they're really great habitats to explore in the summer. Not as fun to explore in the winter because it's mostly dormant. And you get stuck, and sometimes you get real stuck. So, but I enjoy them. They're cool. You gotta have your muck boots, though. Or in the summer, you just gotta accept that your feet are gonna get wet. We got Chrysosplenium americanum, or the American golden saxifrage, a very common wetland plant, right next to the Onoclea sensibilis, or the sensitive fern, another very common fern. You got your Simplocarpus or skunk cabbage right there, your cinnagrass, various carex, clethra, spicebush, and deep muck. Very unpleasant to hike through. You're just like lift. It's hard work, you know. It's a workout, lifting and lowering and shuffling through. Like, you gotta use all your force in the world to get your boot out, and then you take one step, and then you're just back to square one. And then you're just sitting there shoving, moving, and then you bring some muck with you, and then you continue. So I typically stay out of the... Oh, no. That's not good. See that? My boot... fuck. Now my toe's cold. God damn it. Fucking get fucking cold feet. Is this spirea? It is a spirea. That's cool. Yeah. Spirea, not tomatosa, but alba, or the white spirea. Now my foot is very cold, so I think I should just either go back to my car, which I don't feel like it, or, you know, run around, get some energy, drain out my sock, and not stand around in muck swamps. That's why I typically avoid these areas, because that shit happens. I lose my boot. Sad, sad stuff. It's a terrible thing, terrible thing. It's 40 degrees out, and now my toe is very cold. Guess I'll cry and die. I squeezed out my sock. Luckily, I'm wearing wool, so while it might be colder, it's not going to be draining my foot of warmth like if it were cotton. Because when cotton gets wet, it drains the heat. It's a conductor, whereas wool is an insulator. So when wool gets wet, it just kind of stays warm. Black birch, shagbark hickory, yellow birch. Nice diversity. Birchland, and then dying ash tree. You can see at the base where the bark's peeling off is where all the woodpeckers are going after the beetles of the emerald ash borer. And that is why you can just tell. You can just tell by the way it is. I am like magnetized to these type of habitats. Like, you know, I'll be meandering a slope and I'll just find myself always just going towards swamps. Like, I love them so much, but yeah, I suffer. I suffer to love them. I'd love to suffer through them because they're just so muddy and wet and diverse and lots of cool stuff to look at. Especially in the summer when everything's green. You can get lost in them. There's always just something cool around the bend. And you can get lost in them. You're very closed in. It's very private and secretive. Because no one's going to know you're in here. Especially if you're wearing some green. You hear someone trying to come get you, you go hiding. They ain't going to find you. Just lay low. Wow. I don't want to step through there, though. I'll get my other foot wet. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to. Got Pilovicinia lilii. I think I said that right. Or robinwort. It's a little liverwort. Relatively uncommon. I don't see this one very often. But it's definitely around. It's here and there. Robinwort. Ribbonwort. Pretty cool stuff. Pilovicinia lilii. Let me see if that's correct. I'm correct. It's Pilovicinia lilii. Such a complicated name. Why can't it just be robinwort? We got a random hemlock. It's a pretty healthy one, considering the adelgids annihilating them. I bet you there is the adelgid on this one. I mean, I have no doubts. Let's see. I mean, you probably won't see it now, but I don't see it. But the adelgid is a type of scale insects. Oh, look at that. There's a trail here. That's pretty cool. And I hear a brook out that way, so that's the way I'm going. Got this beautiful Tremites, or turkey tail mushroom. Another little polypore. Absolutely gorgeous. That blue color with the brown stripes and the white. Ah, that's awesome. Check it out when I darken it. Oh, I can't darken it? Nope, I can't darken it. Oh, I can. Boom! Look at that. Spantacular. Cool stuff. I love this mushroom. Now we're in a rich, mossy, rocky lowland next to this brook over here. And these areas are extremely diverse and are super cool, super fun to explore and botanize, and definitely orchid habitat. It's a uncommon habitat in acidic areas, but in the right spot, it's the habitat, just like in this area. It's under the open forest category. It's a kind of a birch hickory type forest. This is more like a hickory maple. And it borders a birch hickory. Well, there's the brook. How cool. Ooh, that was a weird feeling in my toe. You ever get weird feelings? Ooh, it's handsome woolly-wort. Oh, nice. One of my favorite mosses, lichen things. Oh. Little creek crossing. And I believe it converges with another creek over there. Alright, we have people's houses, so I don't want to hike in this area anymore. I'm going to back away. I don't like being too close to residences. So I'm going to go that way. Residences, no hike near residences. No good. Hiking in lowlands like these, you'll often find giant upturned trees. And you can tell how they fell by the way they are facing. So this is west. So these were blown down during a nor'easter or a hurricane-like storm with winds coming from the southwest. Or from the southeast and blowing to the northeast or northwest or west. If it was a summer thunderstorm, they'd be facing the other way. And typically in these habitats, the soils tend to be wetter and looser, so a lot of the times the trees can snap like this. And one goes, the next will go, and you'll get a line of trees that fall. You can see that one over there fell during the same storm. And you can kind of gauge the when severe weather events occurred in these areas. And you can judge how many years ago they occurred by the rate of decay of both the stump or the root flare or whatever, and like the state of the trunk. So this one still has its bark. It's just starting to decompose. So this is probably 3 or 4 years old. Sometimes you can also tell because you'll have little plants that will grow on these and kind of shoot up. And this one does. This one has a little black birch growing on it. Actually, no, it has a blueberry. So the blueberry toppled, but part of it right there is grown up. And that's probably 3 or 4 years old right there. So that's how you can tell. Ooh, look, a little dicanthelium right here, a little rosette grass. The beautiful bark on the shagbark. Beautiful older shagbark hickory. Right next to it, we have the skeleton of an ancient juniper. And this thing's probably at least 200 years old. Because these are very slow growing trees, especially growing up on this little ridge. So this thing's ancient, because it takes them about 100 years to get this size. And they can stay standing dead for hundreds of years afterwards. And so I'd say this is a good 200-year-old tree. This is likely one of the shade trees along this pasture wall. Super neat. And there's the lowland I was just in. And then the brooks over there. So right now I'm in a 2-tiered pasture. So this used to be an open kind of pasture to raise farm animals, cattle, sheep. And this is a wall. And that they leveled out. Because this used to be like more of a slope. And I think used to go like this. And they leveled it so it's flat up here. Because it's almost like a terraced wall. I mean, it's like 2 or 3 feet all the way down. And then there's this little stone structure that kind of juts out over here. And, it's basically just a little stone structure. I'm not sure what the purpose is. Didn't really have any ways in. There's one over here. Just like big groups of stones. Like, look how thick this corner of stones is. It's ridiculous. Like, you could build a tower on that. That's awesome. And what was the purpose? I mean, this is days of work right here, moving all these stones. Or maybe just a day of work. But you gotta remember, they did that all through here. And look, there's like this thing here. Look at that pile of stones. Oh my God. It's like an old farmstead. I don't even know. That is a lot of stones. God. I mean, this is weeks of work right here. I mean, this is a pure stone pile. Covered in mosses now. Oh, wow. And what was the purpose? Why so much work to put all these stones in one spot? I mean, this is hundreds of hours of work. And for what purpose? Because I know this is like a pasture land, but why keep all the stones in one big pile? Unless you... Like, what was it? What was it here that was so interesting? Is there like an entrance in the middle and that's why it's sunken down? Because this used to be like some kind of shelter or base or... I couldn't even tell you. Because it's definitely not a foundation. Because foundations tend to be more square or indented. Perhaps it was a stone house. I mean, I don't even know. I mean, maybe it's just like all caved in. It used to have a roof and whatnot. I mean, you really couldn't tell. You couldn't. I mean, but it's so neat. Just all the walls. You just feel the history of the place. To me, it's just like, alright, wow. This used to be so different 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and now it's this. And I have the opportunity to record that history. Oh, I love it. Old pastureland, while not as diverse, sometimes they can be diverse. In areas that's acidic, it kind of just fills in with shrubs like mountain laurel. But in rich areas like this, you get a rich understory. You got polystichum, the Christmas fern. That means it's rich. It's shady, it's rich. You got the hickories, it's rich. Yellow birch, it's rich. So it's a rich pasture land. And it isn't all invasives, because out in Lyme, there was rich pasture land up on the slopes. And towards the end of my hike, it was just pure barberry. So this is almost the same habitat, except the flora is intact. That's so cool to think about. I need to explore here more. That tells us that this is perfect orchid habitat. Maybe even extremely rare orchid habitat. All you gotta do is just search it. Because it's probably there. And maybe not there. But you never know until you search, and nobody's actually doing the searching. And if you don't search, you never know. Another layer. See? Stuff was moved out that way. And now we're... I mean, you can tell it used to be all open. Look at all these junipers. Imagine this 100 years ago. This was a juniper forest. Just pure junipers. And there is still forest exactly like that around here. So this is what those forests look like in 100 years. If it all doesn't, get removed and taken down and made into real estate. So the land will ever be changing. Just to think that this used to be an area where someone frequented. Just to think that this area used to be able to see for miles in some of these areas. And now it's all closed in. I mean, to see Colonial New England must have been fucking beautiful. Amazingly beautiful. Like, just on your horse riding through fucking farmland. I mean, what? And now we're in cars and vehicles and shit. I mean, I still like to look around, but I'm working all day. I'm not really adventuring or traveling or looking around. Which, isn't bad, but I'd love to just do that. Just adventure and explore areas like these. I mean, I do love my job, and I do love working. Without a doubt. It's fucking beyond amazing. It's way better than working for any fucking people, that's for sure. Oh my god. I'd much rather do this every day than do my job. But I think I can get my job to where I can just kind of do it passively. So I wouldn't actually have to do as much work as I do. Or do more work, I don't know. But I know I want to get established. And that takes a while. But it can also be really fast. You don't know until you know. And I don't know until I try. Because for years I've been thinking about starting my own landscaping company. I was like, and I was like, you know what? Send it. I'm fucking sick and tired of shitty companies. And just not being able... They're not shitty, they're great. They do great work to their people. But they don't treat the workers very well. And maybe it's because I was a new guy. I don't know. But I wanted to go in there. I told them my history, my experience, my knowledge. Because, a lot of people aren't passionate about this stuff. And I'm passionate. I read about it. I'm not saying I'm like the most knowledgeable person in the world. But for a landscaper, which most just kind of go home afterwards, or they're just mow and blow. They don't know shit about the outdoors. They know lawn. They know how to operate machinery and equipment, which is fantastic for them. And they're raising a family probably. So, and this just isn't a hobby of theirs. A lot of landscapers, it's just a job. For me, it's like my passion. And I wish more people could see how awesome the work is. And just seeing... And you don't even need a degree to do it. You just learn. Like, you don't need any of that stuff. You just figure it out. I literally learned all these plants just by figuring them out, you know, walking, experiencing it, doing it. Like Chimaphila maculata, extremely common. I know it. Polysticum, I can name all the trees here. It's great. Ask a landscaper to do that. Probably 50, 60 to 70% of them, especially ones where, ooh, look at fucking Goodyear pubescens. The orchid that I've been looking for. I found it here too, in this hickory forest, and it's the type of habitat. Just following these rock walls. But anyways, I'm rambling. I'm gonna start botanizing. Maybe you got something out of that little ramble. I totally lost my track of mind because I love Goodyear. I gotta say. We have Monotropa hypopodes. I also just call it hypopodes. I also think the changes in genus was changed to hypopodes. So maybe the app I use to remember how to say them, maybe it's not updated. And that is New England Wildflowers app. And it's a freaking amazing app. Look at the size of a big red oak. Definitely a 100-year-old tree. This started growing when the junipers were growing. Back to what I was saying. Let's try to get back on what I was talking about the land and the history of it. At least I'll try to recreate that explosion of passion I just did, being passionate about this stuff, because I absolutely love it. And talking about the history, so this used to be able to see for miles up here, and all the work it takes to do this. You know, my theory is that this was both a cropland and a pasture. And so it probably started as like a cropland, like where you go over it and you raise corn. And all those extra rocks, sorry for the borp, you move everything over to the edge. You kind of build it up. You level it out for machines and whatnot. You move the rocks out of the way. And in retrospect, you can see how a New England forest is made. So 100 years ago, this was all pasture. And it had about 500 years ago, this was a old growth forest with an extremely thick organic layer, and it was probably made up of the same trees here. It was red oak and black birch and red maple, but they're all huge. There was a lot, or not all huge, but there was huge ones. There was 400-year-old trees probably, or more. And it was highly diverse. And so this is just the level that we're at now. You know, this is like early. This is what this looks like before. So as the years go by, the organic layer here will slowly add up, and it'll hide all these rocks. So you'll have thicker organic soils, and, you know, that's very attractive to go, you know, haying on and whatnot, you know, doing cropland. And so as you do cropland, you take away that top layer so it sinks back down. And it exposes more and more rocks like this. And eventually you exhaust the layer so much after farming that you're left with kind of shit soils that don't produce anymore, because everything just eroded off the slope into the swamps. And so you abandon it, or it just isn't profitable anymore, or the land is shit, or even compared to western lands where they don't have rocks, like Ohio and the plains and whatnot, you know, people just left it for better farming opportunities, because these fields were getting exhausted. So these fields were abandoned, and this is a blue stem meadow with probably these red cedars. Definitely these red cedars, because they're here. These things are hundreds of years old. These are probably 150 to 200-year-old trees. And maybe not. Maybe 150 at most. And forest rapidly grew up around them. I wouldn't be surprised if it was logged a few times before that. Or like 100 years ago, perhaps it grew up in forest and then they logged it. There's a chance for that. But usually cedars, when you see areas that have been logged, they're not too common. You find just a lot more hardwoods, like because the hardwoods are already established and they seeded and they're just waiting for a disturbance to grow up. Whereas these colonize the field. These are colonizers. I don't think their seeds last too long in the soil because they get eaten. They're delicious seeds. Birds love them. And they need ample sunlight to grow. And they're like a keystone species. A lot of Lepidoptera that eat their leaves and whatnot. They're little needles. And birds love their berries, and they're just they're like, they provide a lot for the ecosystem, like the hickories do with their big nuts and their leaves. Well, poison ivy. Even poison ivy has a place in the landscape. It produces flowers, berries, and leaves that Lepidoptera eat. And then the Lepidoptera caterpillars get eaten by the birds, so it's a whole ecosystem promotion. Look at this. Back into the lowlands. So pretty much they just walled off this little hill. So likely this was a pasture. Just like, as it was getting exhausted, they just kind of moved all the rocks to the side. And so usually the story of the field goes, it starts as like a cropland where they raise corn, or they just chopped it down to be a pasture. But either way, both cropping it and pasteurizing it will eventually allow most of the soil to erode off into the lowlands. Look at that. I almost think New England was a lot hillier back then, or southern New England was. Like, there was more ridges, because there was probably deep creeks, And now it's totally different. Like, we have just basically swamplands and then small highlands. It's almost like originally so this is a valley here. It goes like this. Originally, so it's more shallow now. Probably goes like 50 feet on both sides. Maybe 100 feet at most. But what it likely used to be this was like more of like a deep cut, like stream bed. Or the hills just were steeper. Maybe even that, or maybe they're just like taller. And as that organic layer, it basically slumped off and on both sides and settled into this middle area. So I wouldn't be surprised if these areas lost 5 to 10 feet of their elevation of just pure soil. And just kind of rocks, the bedrock is probably 10 feet, not 10 feet down, it's probably 3 to 4 feet down. And before, it was probably like 5 to 10, below 8 feet deep, but it was 3 feet thicker than it was now. And in some areas, like over these boulders, it was probably or at least a foot of soil. That's what I think. Oh, look, an old road that runs through the swamp here. As you can see that where they put the walls here in the swamp, how it should be relatively tall. This is about 2 feet tall all the way down, but you'll notice that it kind of sinks below grade over here. That's why I think a lot of the topsoil in this area slumped down into the swamp. But without further study, digging test pits and whatnot, you really don't know. This here suggests it was also a rock dumping area. And this is being as rocky as it is, perhaps, this is how that land has always been, and it hasn't changed much in topography since vast amounts of farming. I don't know. It's hard to figure out, because it's so complex. Because you weren't there. Nobody was recording this stuff. And so, in 100 years, maybe we get to see what it does, which is exciting. Look at that big wineberry. Oh, I want to botanize in this area in the summer. This area is sick. Gotta love it, gotta say. So to classify this ecosystem, it would be an open, rich hickory birch forest. Or just a open, rich, deciduous forest. Because it's a whole mix. You got oaks, beeches, hickories, birches, maples. So it's a open, deciduous forest. A rich, open, deciduous forest. There you go. Maybe that's what I'll call it. The rich, open, ancient walls and rich, open, deciduous forests. That's a good name. Hell yeah. Look how big these walls are. Oh my gosh. 5 feet in some areas. Here's more of those trees down from that east blowing wind. Probably 4 to 6 years ago. Maybe up to 10 years ago. This is a massive black birch. This thing's old growth. I mean, this thing's got to be at least 100 years old. We got yellow birch, young yellow birch, and carpinus growing in the understory. Look at all these trees down. These are all red oaks. This one is actually maybe a cottonwood. I think it's a cottonwood. Both of them are dead and rotten cottonwoods. That's another one right there. Yeah. So perhaps something diseased these trees and they died. Maybe gypsy moths? I couldn't tell you, but they died. Probably 10 to 15 years ago and they're rotting, and then a western wind blew them down. Perhaps they're ashes? I don't think they're ashes. They don't look like ashes. And it's basically regrowing with new saplings in the areas where the big trees fell. And the saplings are mostly Carpinus carolinea and yellow birch. This area has a few beeches and birches as well. Mixed deciduous forest and old pasture land. Look at these big rock walls. Moved with horses, likely. An ox. Right along this ledge here. That's a lot of work right there. Super rocky over here, too. So it's neat to see the walls. God, I love exploring these forests. Holy smokes. These are more spice bush. Oh man, look at that. Christmas fern. Wow. Deep soil here, that's for sure. Perhaps this is an old dam, because there is a little creek that runs through here. Look at some of the boulders here. Absolute giants. Yep, there's the creek. So my guess is they kind of blocked this off and dammed it a little bit to provide more water for cows during times of drought. And also these areas would, by backing up the water, allow water to stay in the soil so your grass continues growing around these ponds. You know, in case it gets severe drought. Look at that beautiful spoon-leaved moss. Ah, this place is cool. And as we ascend this small hill here, the forest changes more into an acidic oak upland. You'll still get the hickories and some birches, but you start getting a stronger composition of oaks. And here we got white oak and red oak, which are, you know, the most common oaks in the area. Red oaks seem to hybridize. I'm still figuring out how to tell the difference between red, scarlet, northern red, southern red, or maybe not southern red. I haven't seen any of those around here, and black. So there's 4 different species of oaks, and they all hybridize. And it's just like a spectrum, more or less. I can ID them by their leaves. That basically, a red oak typically is in dry habitats. A birch is typically or a black birch is typically in drier or shady habitats, you know. Hickories tend to be in more rich habitats. So it just kind of tells you, like, if you know it's a red oak, the area is likely rich, you know. It's without a doubt a red oak, you know. And then you got those subvariants of red oak being black, scarlet, and whatnot. So I don't really do much research on it, but being out in the field and just like looking at stuff, a white oak is a white oak, a red oak is a red oak, you know. I mean, some of them are sharper leaves, so they lean more towards scarlet, but in the same area you'll find, you know, red oak, and they hybridize. They actively hybridize, and there's a spectrum. You know, like you could literally get like a line of leaves between red oak and scarlet oak, and you'd get every shape in between them. So they actively hybridize. And you can find multiple different shapes in the same tree. Like on a scarlet oak, you can have a leaf on it that looks like a red oak because it's in the shade or something like that. So classifying them is, I just leave it to the group, Lobate, the genus of the red oaks, or the group of the red oaks. Because, you know, white oak is also in the genus Quercus, but white oak is very obviously different with its rounded lobes and its bark and its acorn look. It's just, you know, it's definitely different. But with the scarlet oaks, they're all kind of deeply lobed and pointy, and they hybridize. So it's harder to tell. You know, it's like, how can you put this as its own species of oak, like when it's nothing like it. It's not, it should be more in the spectrum of red oaks, because there's 4 species that look similar to this, and there's the white oak that looks like this. So I don't think they should have split it. Oh look, there's also sugar maple here, so you know it's really rich. Sugar maple only grows in rich habitats, moist rich habitats. Epic. Here we're reaching kind of the edge of the hill where it slopes off towards the south. We got black huckleberry, and we got corylus. We have Galusha and corylus as the understory. So it's a rich and dry. We have greenbrier here and there. We still have our oaks and hickories and birches. And that's a nice slope right there. And it just slopes off. Love it. It's probably a 75-foot slope, maybe 80. And you have hemlocks down there too. That's awesome. No, those aren't hemlocks, those are cedars. Ah, oh, that's cool. So this is a little flatland beyond it that used to have just kind of like a mix of cedars. So imagine this. So this used to likely be cut. This is all cut down. This was just logged. A logged hill. A steep pasture for cows maybe, because there's walls on both sides. Perhaps it was always forest. Perhaps it was just logged. Who knows? But if this was down right here, you could see for miles. You can see through for miles through the tree line. But in the summer you could. And this slope was likely just shrubs or regrowing forest, or it was all grassland. Who knows? And that was a little thicket of cedars. So imagine it. Just a little thicket of cedars and an opening. I love to think about that. Look at this young Carpinus. Maybe not young, it's probably 40 years old. They take a while to get big. This shallow layer of small stones, these all came from this cropland here. This was likely all corn. And so as they tilled it to plant corn, they moved all the small rocks out to the edge to keep it nice and open and clear for the plow so it doesn't get stuck. It's pretty rocky over here. So this is kind of like the rock dump area. Look, there's old white birch in here. It's cool. And we have these big old oaks, open grown. Those things were probably left. This was likely like a partially cleared pasture. You know, they kept most of the trees and kept it pretty herbaceous. See all the birches, and perhaps those logged, and they only took some of the oak trees. Or it's so old that it is just these oak trees now. Look at them. Huge. So what you're hearing is a white-breasted nuthatch. And maybe another bird. Let me look. So the high-pitched trilling one is a gold-crowned kinglet. And that one's a new one too. Let me see what that one is. At one point this area was even a dump site for fill. Like this gravel here, this gravelly rock mix that people just wanted to get rid of. This is a lot of it. Perhaps this was even a old sourcing yard for this kind of material. Or maybe it was even a mine. Like, look. What we got here? We got some kind of hole. Dude. I think it's a mine. Or an old oh my gosh, what is this? Dude. Oh, I can't use flashlight, that's dumb. Let's see. Okay, flashlight's on. Dude, it's a fucking mine. That's a piece of cut stone right there. No way. I've never found a mine before. I don't think I'll ever explore this mine, but I can let people know who do explore mines. We got some metal hooks there. Yeah, dude, this is a fucking mine. So that's what all that crap was. An old mine. I've never found a mine before. That's awesome. An ancient patch of Monotropa uniflora. There's probably, I don't know, 70? Not 70. Probably a good 30 or 40 individuals here on this one little spot. And so there's enough. It's a population. It's literally a population of like 50 different ones. Or it's one plant producing a junk load of flowers on each little stems. Ah, so cool. Think of this as like a tiny parasitic shrub. Like, think of it, it has a root and a woody stem that sucks. It basically parasitizes fungi. The fungi are its roots. And it sends up this little flower that has powder-like seeds. So it's pretty much a plant that has become a fungi, more or less. So neat. A plant that no longer needs the sun. And honestly, it didn't need the sun because it lives in such a shady understory. So this plant adapted to this kind of understory. It learned to tap into fungi. We're getting into the oak briarlands, or the oak briar uplands. Drier, I guess more rich site. A dry rich site, more or less. Because in dry acidic sites, typically it's just heath, and briar tends to stay out of super duper acidic areas, even though it can tolerate it. Like, if there's abundant heath in mountain laurel, you won't find thickets of greenbrier. It'll be like a minor component. Whereas here, it's a major component, as well as with the blueberries. It's a more inland variant of the habitat of coastal oak briarlands. It's more upland. Going towards another giant, beautiful wall. This one's probably around 5 feet tall in some places. Again, hundreds of hours of work. We're going to go up to that little cedar knob. Check it out. We have Australia virginiana, slowly becoming one of my favorite trees of our forest. It is an upland shade birch. So while Carpinus carolinea, the hornbeam, is more of a lowland kind of, it needs moist soils. These can tolerate drier upland soils. And they need rich conditions to grow. You won't find these in mountain laurel lands at all. And usually you don't find mountain laurels where these are either. They're like opposites almost. We have Aquilea canadensis, or columbine. Little lanterns. Beautiful red hummingbird pollinated flowers. And they bloom in the early spring. One of the most gorgeous spring flowers. And it's in a buttercup family. The buttercup has some really nice spring ephemerals. I love that. Look at that. And from up here, you can see the start of the development with probably 4 lots right here going in. And soon, more of these uplands will be turned into probably housing, regraded, or housing just put in the flat areas up here. I hope they leave it. It's a really nice area. Got mullein, the invasive mullein. It's not too invasive here, it's just kind of here and there. Mullein, I mean Verbascum thapsus. That's the exact species, but everybody knows what it is. It's such a common thing. And it's pretty much, you can find it all over the world. So, that's what it is. I have Macranthes virginiensis. It's a little plant in the saxifrage family. Saxifragiales or whatever. And it has a little white flower in early spring. And it's one of the first spring wildflowers to form. And its habitat is rock crevasses. So it's kind of rare. You won't find it grown in the soil like a squirrel. So in this forest, I'd say it's pretty old. You can tell something is old growth by how much old, dead, rotting logs there are and the stages of those decay. This is a red oak right here. Like a young one. Probably it died or fell down when it was, I'm going to say, 50 years old, maybe 40. And it's been rotting for probably another 30 or 40. So that puts the forest at least 100, not to mention this big tree, which fell probably another, at least 30 years ago. So 30 years ago would put it at, so this thing died in the 1990s. And it was already probably 70 years old. It's definitely a 100-year-old tree. That means the taller trees here are at least 100 years old or more. And so they're that much larger. But this tree in particular looks really big compared to some of these already in here. I've entered the Greenbrier Oaklands. And I think I'm here to stay in the Greenbrier Oaklands. This is almost upland territory. For areas in more acidic areas, this would be more filled with heath. Kind of like how I was yesterday in Groton, along the coast. So all the Hedwigia, the trees are smaller, so it's getting into a glade habitat, which I like. I love glade habitats. This out, it's a valley. It goes lower, and then it goes even higher than we are now. This habitat is fucking awesome. Super rocky. Super steep on one side, like over here. And then just points of rocks like that. All over here. I love it. This fucking place out. Super duper steep right here. You'd fall and die. That's probably an 80-foot drop. And it's super steep too. Wowie. Sometimes these toplands can have really cool plants. We got rock polypodies there. Holy smokes. This is fucking awesome. Got the rock wall over there too. Oh, yeah, it sucks that there's going to be residences there. So you'll never be able to explore this far without feeling a little looked at. You can't be excited about things. Check out that beautiful ridge. About 30 or 40 feet down. Ah, spleenwort's fucking awesome. A splenium. I love a splenium. Such a great fern. Look at that thing. I'm in another rich grape birch land with grapevines tangling over the trees and pretty much the overstory of birch family trees like the Carpinus, the Betulenta, there's Australia down here, but it's a lot of black birch, Betulenta, and the Vitis, these giant grapes, graybark grape likely. Maize polypore, look at that. Forget the genus name, but it's a maize polypore or maize guild, something like that. It's a shelf fungus. Absolutely gorgeous. Adiantum pedatum, or the maidenhair fern. These are only found in very high quality, rich sites, and it's quite rare. So it's super cool to see, and it's right by those maize fungi. And this is a pure groundwater wetland. So this is basically, it might be higher pH, or it might be acidic, but it's going through the bedrock pretty much only. That's so cool. Or coming up through faults or whatever, or just drainage from the hills around it, and it just has one drain. So I'm thinking it's pretty high pH, because maidenhair fern needs high pH areas. Going through a sick beech grove, and these pock marks are from beech bark disease, which doesn't kill beeches, it just maims them and makes them kind of ugly. And then there's no foliage on any of these young ones because of the beech leaf disease, which causes the leaves to crinkle up like this. And the beech leaf disease is caused by a tiny nematode that basically eats away at the inside of leaves, causing them to come back all shriveled and sad. And they also reside in the buds and eat those as well. So this beech grove will be dead in a few years, which is kind of sad, but it's every beech grove now, which I've just accepted. I'd say this area is more of a acidic creek because of the amount of beech and the amount of blueberries. Blueberries like acidic areas, so seeing them in abundance here, as well as the beech, which also like acidic areas, it makes you think, yeah, it's probably an acidic seep or acidic forest, or just generally more acidic and not as rich, but maybe organically rich, but acidic, kind of like how bogs are. So this is essentially like acidic seep, almost bog-like, except there's no sphagnum. We have Flebia radiata, or the wrinkled gill mushroom. Look how beautiful that is. Bright orange. And it has such a neat texture. Look at that. That's a stunner. Another mylar balloon. This one is a My Little Pony. I couldn't name him. My little sister could, though. Coming with me. I'm gonna wrap this up. Heading home now through this upland briarland, oak briarland. And I'll probably just time-lapse it the rest of the way. In this area, I would call it dead cedar land, because these are all, or dead juniperous land. So these are all juniperous virginianas that got shaded out and died by this mix of oak and hickory and black birch and red maple and sugar maple. So it's on its way to becoming a really nice mesic forest. As these things rot down, it'll probably be like this for another 30 or 40 years, and then the wildflowers will take over and it'll be really nice in here. I love this kind of habitat. Kind of a pain in the ass right now to walk through, but it's definitely rich right now. Or it's on its way to becoming pretty rich. We are in a declining juniperous virginiana forest, or juniper forest. The declining juniper forest. And it's declining due to the moving in of larger oak trees, shading out all these junipers. So I just showed you an area that was basically further along in the process. And this is what these forests look like. Not the most diverse thing in the world, and they can contain decent amounts of invasives, but this just shows this was probably abandoned probably 30 or 40 years later than some of these other areas. That's my thought, at least. Look, it's an old dump too. Wow. That sucks. I hate old dumps. Garbage. That's a bummer. Not fun to see. Just go dump it out in old pasture. No one cares. That sucks. Old chairs. By a cemetery, and there's this peculiar divot. I've only seen this in a couple forests, and it just goes down to nothing. And it's usually young, and then we got a cemetery right here. Probably a 17 or 1800 cemetery, surrounded by blueberries. And somewhat maintained. There's a veteran here. That's cool. Old cemetery. Alright.